So let's talk about the new and shiny melee Terminators with big hammers and lightning claws, with an overview of the Terminator Assault Squad in Warhammer 40K. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Space Marines and Terminators, and in this video we're doing an overview of the Terminator Assault Squad, perhaps a unit on plenty of people's minds at the moment, with their recent new models heading for the game. Let's talk briefly about their lore and new models, go through their datasheet and Codex Space Marines, a few of the many combos and synergies that you can put with them to make them scarier on the battlefield, and take a look at how the best players have been using them in competitive army lists in the recent past. Those to talk about, so let's jump straight in. Terminator armour in Warhammer 40k is pretty well stored, artificer crafted armour, bigger, more technologically advanced, and far more sturdy than regular power armour. Terminator plates generally tends to get given to the chapter's first company, and units often get into the fight beaming down via teleportation. The most classic loadout for Terminators is the Power Fist and Stormbolter, though many equip themselves solely for close combat, typically being armed either with Thunderhammer and Storm Shield or dual Lightning Claws, and several chapters are particularly well known for doing so, in particular the Salamanders, though perhaps the Imperial Fist often doing so as well, following the example of Darnath Lysander. The Terminator Assault Squad has seemed like it was one of the single most likely units to get a model update in Warhammer 40k. We had bigger and shinier new regular Terminators at the start of 10th edition, though the Assault Squad didn't drop at the same time. Seems like it was Games Workshop's intention to do some Terminator releases at the start of 10th and some at the end. At least at time of recording you can still get the current set of them, smaller in stature than the new ones for 10th edition, and the squad has two loadout choices, either Thunderhammer and Storm Shield or Lightning Claws, and the entire unit can be equipped that way. The Blood Angels until recently also had a variant version. It looks like that kit's been taken down, as seemed pretty likely to happen after the upscaled models were released. Compared with the previous ones, the new models match the size and scaling of the chunkier Terminators at the start of 10th, a bit more raw mass to them, and I feel like the pose is a little bit better as well. They broadly keep the same sort of look and feel, they still have the square storm shields, the same loadout options, and there's just a few small differences, such as the option to field with non-helmeted heads, and the squad gets a new style teleport homer as well. Here's the Thunderhammer and Storm Shield loadout for them. One guy gets a slightly elongated Storm Shield, it seems denoting the squad sergeant here, judging by the red trim on this guy's helmet. And then here's the Lightning Claw loadout, a slightly different style compared with the old ones. The blade's just a little bit more curved here. I do quite like the appearance of them. At the moment we're waiting for them to come out as an individual kit on their own. Games Workshop's first had them launch over this weekend in the Crux Terminatus box set, and kind of as expected they didn't make enough of them. So in a lot of regions of the world they've sold out basically instantly, though there might be a few more in brick and mortar Games Workshop stores when they go on full sale in 2 weeks' time. Hopefully they won't be too far behind as to releasing the individual kits though. When they do, it's likely to mirror the prices of the old ones, around about $65 or £42.50 for a box set of them. With shiny new models though, there's going to be renewed interest in putting them on the tabletop. Terminators in general for the core Codex Space Marines have been a bit more of a niche unit during 10th edition unfortunately, though I'd say not so far behind that they don't have some draw to them. As we'll see later, they do get used in a subset of competitive lists, though they're certainly a niche pick and not a majority taken one. In game when taken at the moment, there are 180 points for 5 of them, or 360 for 10, notably being one of the biggest and most points intensive Space Marine units that you can make out there, which often has some interest for having super efficient stratagems or leader or enhancement combos. They're an infantry unit with only melee weapons and the deep strike keyword, which means they can be an interesting choice for rapid ingress to get them into close combat, dropping down in the enemy turn and then moving forward from there. For their stat line, they're relatively durable for the points cost, at least compared with quite a lot of core Codex Space Marine options out there. A regular Terminator stat line is 3 wounds at toughness 5 with a 2+ save and a 4+ invulnerable, though they do pay for the protection with a slower movement characteristic of 5. In particular, the Assault Terminators are sturdier than most though, as with the Hammer loadout you can get a Storm Shield, and that means that the Terminator bodies have 4 wounds apiece. It won't make a difference against damage 2 things, but against damage 1 or damage 3. That is a pretty enormous boost to durability relative to the standard squad. For their damage output, here are the stats for their Thunderhammers versus Lightning Claws. The Thunderhammers get 3 attacks apiece at Strength 8, AP 2 and Damage 2 and Devastating Wounds, though the way that they chose to balance Thunderhammers and their Devastating Wounds in 10th edition is to make them hit a bit worse than Power Fists, so they only hit on a 4+ rather than the normal 3. The Lightning Claws on the other hand, as you'd expect, tend to be good at blending hordes. They get 5 attacks there, hitting at Strength 5, AP 2 and Damage 1, so a power weapon style profile, but they also get twin linked, so just a bit better at punching up against tougher things versus the average power weapon. Not having multiple damage though does mean that they're going to struggle into quite a few targets. The damage output for both of these does tend to skew towards the targets that you might expect. This is the damage output for an unbuffed squad going into these targets. The Lightning Claws are just ridiculously better than the Thunderhammers against Horde-style targets, killing around about 15 odd Termagants. The Thunderhammers are only managing 6 or so, and it does mean a squad like that could have more chance of getting bogged down against chaff. Against sort of Space Marine to light vehicle targets though, things are fairly well even. They have near enough the same damage output against Intercessors or Terminators, around about 4 or 5 standard issue Space Marines slain, around about 2 Terminators slain, the Lightning Claws outperforming against both of those slightly, despite not having damage too. It's only against the heavier targets that the Thunderhammers come into their own, around 4 wounds versus 3 against a Gladiator, or around 4 wounds versus 2 or 3 into a Land Raider target, but still not really being very exciting damage output for 180 points into either target. Overall for damage output, there isn't really all that much between them. If we added more targets, the Hammers would be notably good against things that are say toughness 6 to 7, and the Claws would outperform a bit against toughness 9. Besides against a few niche targets, they're near enough fairly equivalent, but it does mean that it overall winds up being a win for the Hammer loadout, as that's the one where you get the extra wound at no additional cost, where the Lightning Claws don't. For that reason, more than anything, you very rarely see Lightning Claws in competitive play versus the Hammer loadout. Before we move on with their datasheet and support options, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in Tabletop Stronghold, one solid option for Warhammer transport and storage boxes, currently on sale until the end of the month. Their boxes are magnetic transport ones, the idea being that you attach magnets to the bottoms of your model's bases, and that allows you to put them in steel trays within the box, so you can have lots of miniatures all ranked up next to each other, knowing that they're not going to be bashing on each other or needing some insulating foam to cushion them. Tabletop Stronghold specific designs of these are the mag cases. Their cases are made out of notably really quite big and sturdy MDF, very hard to break or damage when assembled, and then within the boxes you have different levels of steel trays that can slide in and out, so you can get different heights for different sizes of miniatures that you might want to transport. On the front goes a clear acrylic sheet so you can see the miniatures while they're in transit and know what's where. And in general, for people who've had feedback on these guys, I've generally heard pretty positive things about their stuff down in the comments. They also have a terrain set as well for some MDF stuff if that's of interest to you, that gets cheaper if you buy a mag case. If you'd like to take a look at any of their range, there'll be links below in the video description, and I'll cycle back to them briefly at the end of the video to talk about them there as well. A big thanks to them for sponsoring this one. Getting back to the Assault Terminators though, and rounding up for their datasheets, they have their special rules, which I must admit aren't exactly a strong suit for their datasheet. First up, they have Terminator's Assault. Each time this unit ends a charge move, enemy units within engagement range must test Battle Shock. It's definitely not nothing, and probably the biggest deal is that it could prevent some powerful stratagems that might happen in the fight phase, but given that the majority of the time the opponent's just going to pass that Battle Shock test, I wouldn't really have this one dictate anything that you're doing particularly. It's just a nice to have if you do wind up charging something fearsome. Otherwise, their other special rule is the Teleport Homer one. This one's the same as the regular Terminator squad. You put a marker down to represent the Teleport Homer at the start of the battle, and can potentially expend it for a 0 CP rapid ingress once per game, so you do have to set up within 3 inches of the marker. I probably wouldn't fixate on this one too much. Likely it's going to be best to put the marker somewhere sort of behind terrain where you might drop down and the unit be safe. The idea with rapid ingress is normally to drop the squad, not have it shot, but be in a position where you can move up and get an easy charge in the following turn. But given that it's just very dependent on when the opponent actually chooses to move, you can set up the Teleport Homer in a likely location, so there's a pretty good chance it just won't wind up making good sense to use it. If the opponent does wind up doing something weird with their units to wind up countering the supposed threat of it though, then so much the better. Overall, for main strengths and weaknesses, I say the biggest one for the Assault Terminators is they can be a really big, strong unit for synergies such as stratagems and character enhancements, and are interesting within the Space Marine army, being at least a slightly tough unit for the points cost. I do have some nice synergy with a couple of named characters now out of the latest release wave. For downsides of them in particular, it's maybe a shame that they lost the Fury of the First rule for their own Battle Shock one. They are a bit pricier than regular Terminators, even if they do have more defense. The damage output is quite low per model, and once they're down they do tend to be quite slow when they're on the board with that 5-inch move. In Divergent chapter armies as well that often support their melee rather well, they've generally got unique equivalents that can do rather well. Both Space Wolves, Deathwing and Deathwatch all have those. Talking through support for them, a big and relatively scary damage and defensive unit, as mentioned, will be efficient for stratagems. Armour of Contempt in particular is very nice with 2+ Terminator plate, and that could have some really high value, particularly if you're attacked by some AP2 stuff in melee. And we've already mentioned Rapid Ingress as well, really nice. Even if you can't use the Teleport Homer, then if you've got a unit in reserve, dropping them down after you've perfectly seen where the enemy will move can be a really big deal for lining them up with a super short charge on your turn. They feel like they're a particularly good squad to use Oath and Moment with as well. The common Thunderhammer loadout will particularly enjoy that, given that they hit on a 4+. It gives you outsized value to re-rolling those hit rolls versus versus if you hit on a 3. The +1 to wound definitely doesn't hurt as well against tougher vehicles for core Codex compliant chapters, and for the lightning claws, again that's a very big deal as well, in particular for the targets that the lightning claws would wound on a 6. It means even against tough things that are say toughness 12 or higher, they'd be wounding on a 5+ and re-rolling the wound roll, so even titans and things they'll be wounding most of the time. Oath of Moment does enough to make the lightning claws go from being a bit more of a slightly niche anti-light target unit to genuinely having a solid threat against the toughest targets in the game. Admittedly though, you could say that about quite a lot of Space Marine damage output. For transports it doesn't usually make sense for them. Assault Terminators don't really need the durability, and while they do like the speed, you can deep strike and rapid ingress them, and if you have access to advance and charge in the detachment, there's a good chance that you can just trot up to a mid-board objective on foot. That's going to have value in itself if the opponent backs off from that, but if they don't, they're likely going to get into melee fairly fast anyway. If really wanting one for fun factor though, a Land Raider of some description isn't the worst thing in the world, particularly at some of the lower points cost they now have. It's not the sort of thing that you're likely to see in any sort of competitive game though. Character support tends to be something the vast majority of Terminator squads do tend to use though, and usually either a named one or one of the generic ones with some enhancement. For the generic ones, there's 4 different options. The Captain in Terminator armor that can give you -1 command point stratagems and also allow you to re-roll charge rolls and brings a bit of melee power in his own right. He's definitely not awful, but at 95 points he does feel like he pays a premium. There's the Terminator Librarian, who gives you sustained hits 1 and a 4+ feel no pain against psychic attacks. He's only 75 points, and that's actually a fairly good damage increase for the Thunderhammer Terminators in particular. When you're only hitting on a 4+, sustained hits 1 equals a +33% damage output boost, really not too bad when it's against all targets. The Terminator Chaplain gives you a +1 to wound against everything, and also helps to defend the squad against mortal wounds as well. Again, fairly reasonable like the Librarian in Terminator armor, though against at least a fair few targets with the Hammer squad he'll probably add about the same or less, just due to the +1 to wound not helping out the devastating wounds, so it means against tougher targets you often come out to be around about even between the damage output boost there, and the Librarian's going to be the better buffing character against weaker units. Then we've got the Terminator Ancient that has just had the new model come out in Crux Terminators. As banner bearers go, he's one of the more interesting ones, at least as far as we know so far. He's still going to retain the ability to take a Power Fist, even if there's not one modelled, so it might go away next edition, but it does mean that he's still a pretty reasonable threat in his own right. He gives you +1 OC, which genuinely isn't too bad for a survivable unit that's likely to be fighting on the front lines, and he gives you damage buffs if your squad is damaged but not outright destroyed. And for Terminators, that's a bit more likely to happen, making him a more interesting choice to go with a big 10-man Terminator assault squad. He's perhaps particularly interesting as he can join even if there's a captain attached, so you could have him to get his buffing rule plus any enhancements into the unit if we're using a special character. Talking of which though, I would consider the 2 Terminator armoured special characters from the core codex to be a level above these last 4. And as a result, it makes the Terminator Assault Squad a bit more standout for the Imperial Fists and Iron Hands compared with elsewhere. For the Imperial Fist, we have Mr. Lysander himself, a 7-wound Terminator character who adds some strength 10 and damage 3 attacks into the unit, and then gives the squad a buff of -1 to wound, and that is some pretty excellent value, making the squad just overall more survivable and threatening. He'll also give you Terminators and Assault Terminators OC2 as well. As we said, that's also genuinely very interesting. Terminator Assault Squads pair really well with him, and there's another level of incentive if you went for the Imperial Fist unique detachments, the Emperor's Shield. It feels like the overall offering isn't quite as strong as some Space Marine detachments out there, but if you did want to make use of that, Lysander's unit gets to reroll wound rolls against the Oath target, which is pretty excellent with Thunderhammers with devastating wounds, plus a fair bit of stratagem support that's boosted from the first company, a fights on death on 3+, a +1 to hit and maybe wound, and a return to reserves. Either way, if you're including Imperial Fist, there's a pretty strong argument for any detachment having Lysander plus a unit of Assault Terminators to lead. Just a standout, if not perhaps more so in his own detachment, is Caanok Var. He's a Terminator character who's extra sturdy with a 5+ feel no pain, and gets to strike with a Power Fist style profile in melee. He's just a very strong all-rounder, giving you either lethal hits or sustained hits into the squad, so it'll make the unit both nastier against vehicles and sustained hits into lighter stuff, which as mentioned is already very nice on the 4+ hitting Thunderhammers, as well as having 2 other useful buffs, giving an infantry unit the scout ability, allowing you to redeploy a unit. The redeploy could affect his own squad, but either of those just add some extra value elsewhere to his army and help justify his inclusion. The place that he looks seriously interesting though is in the Hammer of Avernii, where his Terminator unit just looks downright scary, a version of the first company, but arguably one that can have a lot more effects to other armies out there, as like the Imperial Fist version it gives you reroll wound rolls of 1 versus the Oath of Moment targets, So now that'll be doubly boosted Oath of Moment, including the +1 to wound that you already get, but then Caanok Var can hand that out to a second target per turn, but it does have to be one that you can see. That means that you can get some monumental damage output on not one but two different targets, and Caanok Var wants to be in the army and somewhere threatening, so a sturdy bodyguard is super incentivized, and he'll work very well with Terminator assault squads there. As we've already seen just on his base profile, he has some pretty great damage buffs for Assault Terminators. Sustained hits is already very nice, and that would stack with the Oath target if he wants to use one of the Oaths for his own unit, and then the rest of the stratagems can basically all be relevant on the Assault Terminators. -1 damage when charged, returning to reserve, a potential +1 to hit and wound if the squad's below full strength, Armour of Contempt. You can potentially get the other version, so either sustained or lethal hits, and the sticky objectives after movement is no bad thing either. It seems like Mr. Var, with a retinue of Assault Terminators, could be one of the single strongest ways to play them, and both he and Lysander just seem to get far more out of the units than just generic characters. For other support options though, Space Marines have a lot of detachments, so potentially quite a lot of stuff that could be genuinely interesting for a big central, big synergy unit. Both Gladius and Stormlance tend to be good for slower moving elite infantry that can fight well. They both give advance and charge, which the Assault Terminators really like. Gladius has advanced melee, fights on death and a reactive move. Stormlance has a 6-inch reactive move, and the White Scars version can boost melee damage for a stratagem as well. They're also interesting in the Shadowmark Talon and the regular Vanguard detachment. A durability boost at range is never too bad for the stealth and the cover. They also both have reactive moves of one sort or another and can return to reserve, but perhaps the really standout ones out of those detachments are the enhancements there. You could have a really big, tough, scary unit that can infiltrate onto the midboard and have a problematic amount of Terminator armor ready to be in a super threatening position straight away. And then Shadowmark Talon could use them as an alternative unit to Rapid Ingress turn 1. That's more commonly used with a Jump Captain and a big unit of Vanguard veterans, but getting a big unit of Assault Terminators into the first rank of the enemy and annihilating stuff straight away also seems massive. Otherwise, for really focal ones, the Librarius Force is interesting too. That detachment just has so many different options that you can use with a Terminator Librarian. Terminator Librarians are already good with the Assault Terminators, and then it's very easy to get reroll ones to hit and wound if they're going to be dealing damage this turn. And there are options for other things as well, like Biomancy. The Terminator Librarian can be given Celerity for advance and charge, and there's a +1 strength stratagem as well. It is going to be a seriously intimidating unit though, both being relatively tanky, and then there's Thunderhammers getting reroll ones to hit and wound and sustained hits 1 as well, and you could throw Oath of Moment into the mix as well. Otherwise, First Company has Terminators as a central unit. We already talked about the two arguably buffed variants for the Iron Hands and Imperial Fist. Unfortunately, it just doesn't really do quite enough to carry itself for raw strength for the core Codex. It's maybe a shame the Salamanders don't get a little more for it. They do have a +1 to wound stratagem from Firestorm or Forge Fathers. It could be nice enough for the Flipper Dice to a 6 enhancement as well. Most of the ones for the other detachments tend to be a bit niche. You could get some damage rerolls from Ironstorm, for example. To get a snapshot of Terminators and their use in competitive lists in Warhammer 40K, I took a look through 50 high-placing Space Marine lists that had all done well in tournaments, though bear in mind that this is before anyone's been playing with the Hammer of Avernii detachment, so if anyone does wind up having some success with that, it won't show here. Out of those 50 top lists, 5 armies used Terminators of one sort or another. So as expected, they are a bit rare on the competitive scene for Space Marines, but certainly not completely unplayed, and the ones used were for a few different purposes. Somebody used a 5-man Assault Terminator squad with Infiltrate and Raven Guard Shadowmark Talon. Scary enough for yet another big first turn threat, I suppose. There was a Gladius list that used 5 Hammer Terminators with Darnath Lysander. It certainly makes that unit overall far scarier. There's a 10-strong Hammer unit used in a Librarius Conclave list with a Celerity Librarian, so advance and charge and big rerolls on offer there. And for regular Terminators, the non-assault variety, there was another Librarius one with a 10-man squad, and a Shadowmark Talon using a 10 squad with a captain with Hunter's Instincts, so Rapid Ingress turn 1. Overall, definitely not mainstream for competitive Space Marine lists, but not so far out of the question that they don't get played in competitive armies. For the Assault variant though, it's certainly all about the hammers, and all about getting either a good enhancement or a strong special character into the squad. For the Divergent chapters, they may be in the weird position where they do genuinely add some good melee threats to the Terminator squads, but also just tend to have better options within their armies that understandably Games Workshop tends to incentivize them to build towards. Blood Angel, Say, and Liberator have easy access to advance and charge, and +2 strength and +1 attack on the charge are always good. Black Templars can get a permanent +1 to wound against tougher stuff in melee. I feel like both of those are at least on paper interesting as a scary unit that's still going to deal quite a bit of damage with any buffs that they can throw at them, but also being a bit tankier than the average thing that they tend to field. Given how good the Blood Angels, Jump Troops and Sword Brethren are though, they're still rarely played. Otherwise for Space Wolves, Unfortunately, their named Terminator characters can only lead the Wolfguard ones, and the Wolfguard ones do feel like pretty much directly better Assault Terminators. They're slightly cheaper, have a big -1 to wound built in with them, and have a punchy profile on the pack leader with a Great Axe. The Dark Angels will gain the Deathwing keyword, so can use a lot of synergies. Again, their problem is that the Assault Terminators tend to be just directly inferior to Deathwing Knights right now. The plus 70 points for them gives them a -1 damage, which is enormous, a watcher for some mortal wound protection, and just hugely more melee threat, and between all that, Assault Terminators just don't get a look in. For Deathwatch, it's kind of interesting in that they have their Deathwatch Terminator squad, though it feels like it's often functioning as a Terminator Assault squad plus. You could basically take an entire unit of these guys with the Thunderhammers and Storm Shields, and then just stick 3 Cyclone missile launchers on the top. And again, that basically gives you a flatly improved Terminator Assault squad for just 10 points more than the vanilla variant, which seems a bit mad for that many missiles. These guys do feel like a good example of why the regular Terminator Assault squad should probably cost a bit less. I wasn't exactly hopeful, though I thought it could be interesting just to take a look at the Divergent chapter competitive list that had done well. I looked at 20 of each for Blood Angels, Dark Angels, Black Templars and Space Wolves. Literally no use of either of the generic Terminator units for either of them there. They've all got their own unique units that tend to outcompete them, and people generally prefer to play as well. So absolutely great use of things like the Space Wolf, Wolfguard Terminators, the Deathwing Knights, and the Deathwatch Terminator squad with hammers and shields plus missiles or maybe assault cannons occasionally. But unfortunately, Terminator Assault squads seem to be seen as just a bit suboptimal for all of these due to the direct competition. Overall, between all that, for datasheet power, I'd rate them as usable but a bit niche or suboptimal. For most armies out there, you probably are going to get more value out of a different damage dealer, and perhaps only really come into their own for certain detachments or certain characters, where paying a premium for a big investment unit might make sense. Lysander, Caanok Var, and maybe Librarius or some Vanguard or Shadowmark shenanigans might make the most sense. For the unit though, for how I play them, I feel like either 5 squads or 10 squads could certainly be alright. They're still a pretty meaty unit as a 5-man squad, and if you go all in to get the most out of big central buffs, the 10 squad is fine too. Build around that, usually with a Thunderhammer and Storm Shield currently. And then for the battle plan, you'd have to decide in each given matchup whether they're going to be striding up the board and onto a mid-board objective, or getting into melee via rapid ingress. Both could genuinely work on them depending on what you have in the rest of your army, and whether or not your opponent's got an army that's going to really screen you back and mean that you're not likely to get into anything with rapid ingress. If that's the case, it's probably better to foot slog. If you are likely to get big charges on important models, then deep strike and dropping in could be the way to go. In an ideal world, they probably want to be moving up and charging into enemy important units on the mid-board objective, wrecking them with Thunderhammers just with having a big mighty squad, and then hopefully left alive as a very sturdy wall to face the enemy counter-attack, where at least compared with the majority of Space Marines, opponents are going to have to put a bit of more significant effort into downing these guys. Really quite a lot of wounds with good saves, and it could make them harder to deal with either reactive moves or Armour of Contempt. Hopefully between all of that, they can charge in, destroy something, take a whole load of firepower in return, and if the opponent doesn't want to do that, go on to fight more things. And hopefully while they are preoccupied with dealing with a very sturdy unit, a lot of the rest of the army goes untouched and not dealt with. In any case though, let me know your thoughts as to the Terminator Assault Squad. Have you been using them in game recently, and will you be looking to put some new models on the board, either from Crux Terminators if you're lucky enough to land one, or individually when they're released separately? I look forward to hearing your comments and takes down below. Finally, I'll just cycle back to the video sponsor in Tabletop Stronghold and talk a little more about their range of magnetic carry cases. In their boxes, they have these steel trays ranked up within them. Here's how many miniatures can fit on each tray, around about 90 odd 25mm bases when maximally loaded, or 6 knight armigers. You might want to space things out a bit more than this though. And then those trays can go in boxes of different sizes. Here's the mini one, which still has some big room for some big tanks on the ground floor, usually $70 or £62 when it's on sale. The prices here generally including postage, though there may be VAT or sales tax on top of this. They deliver to these places, and the boxes all come with a supply of magnets to attach to bases. Then we've got the regular mag case, this one quite a bit taller, as you can see by the Chaos Knight hanging out on the ground floor here, a little pricier at £100 or $115 in the sale, and I'll leave the internal dimensions of these on the screen. Finally, there's also the really big one in the XL mag case, basically 2 of the previous attached together side by side. This one should be big enough for some entire collections out there, and there are some options for having either more or fewer of the steel trays within the case. It's a little cheaper if you didn't need quite so many trays as this. Finally, they do have that MDF terrain set as well. That can be a little cheaper if you're buying a mag case, so it could be of interest if you're in the market for some terrain too. In any case, check them out, links down in the video description. A big thank you to them for sponsoring this one. I'll leave that there for now though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. If you've been enjoying the videos on the channel, Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page. You can find that linked in the video description below as well. Channel patrons get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.